Hi there, everyone. Happy October Awareness Month. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth of Garforth Education. And October is a month where we try and promote the awareness of a number of different exceptionalities, including ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, dyslexia, Down syndrome, and mental health. Today, I am very fortunate to have Dr. Siobhan Lamb join me to talk about ways that parents can support their neurodivergent child and have success in the school system. Hi, Siobhan, how are you?
Hi, Kathryn, how are you? Good, thanks.
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you take a moment and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So I run with another teacher, a company called Embrace Difference, a business called Embrace Difference, where we have three functions. One, we provide professional development to schools to help them teach and support their neurodivergent students. Second, we go into school meetings and act as a mediator or an advocate in those school meetings with parents and schools. And thirdly, we help parents, basically coach parents to become better advocates for their children and understand their children better. We take psychoeducational assessments and explain them to the parents and explain what that means at home, what that will look like at school, and then run some strength-based assessments with the students themselves so that we can paint a picture for both the schools and the parents of what environments will work for their child or their student and what environments won't. So if you have a pool of funding for supports, where should you put all of those supports and where do you not need to spend money on supports so you can better utilize the supports you have?
Right, and figure out what's best for your child.
And figure out what's best for your child and most effective and easy for your child to succeed. And both the other teacher and myself, my partner and myself, are neurodivergent. We have neurodivergent children ourselves and we teach neurodivergent kids. So we have sat on all three sides of the table, being neurodivergent, having neurodivergent children, and being teachers of neurodivergent kids. We know how everyone feels and thinks on that table.
Right, and that's really important. So why don't we just take a moment and have you define what you mean by neurodivergent? I mean, it's a newer term that not everybody's clear on what it means.
So neurodiversity is simply biodiversity. So neurodiversity describes that all brains don't think alike. So every brain is different, just like every organism is different. Every single one of us is neurodiverse because every single one of us is part of the neurodiversity ecosystem. Neurodivergent is the counter to neurotypical, where neurotypical is the way most people's brains work, or the common, I shouldn't say common, but the majority of brains work. And neurodivergent sort of is different than the most common. It's where the minority of brains work. So it includes things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, Tourette's, or a raft of things. But it's just your brain doesn't function the way the majority of brains does. The interesting thing with neurodivergent brains that we're looking at now is MRIs of neurodivergent brains. We can see that they function differently, but we don't know how different it is. All we know is that the impact of every bit of information is far stronger and less predictable than in a neurotypical brain. And so when people say, oh, autistics, a lot of autistics wear headphones because they can't cope with the noise at the same level the neurotypical standing next to them can, that's not true. It's because the autistic is hearing the noise louder. And so they're not coping with the noise at the level that they're hearing it, which is a lot louder than the person next to them.
Yeah, and it's really understanding the individual's strength and weakness profile, right? So you can use the strengths to support those areas that are more difficult. And, today I think we're focusing on how parents can learn more about their child's strength and weakness profile and their differences so that they can succeed in the school system. And it's hard because our school systems are built for the neurotypical. And we need and our teacher education programs are built for our training teachers how to teach the neurotypical students, so they don't have the education on how to address educational needs of neurodivergent children, and they don't have the skills or even the understanding of the different diversities that exist.
Yeah, so I would say in Australia, most teachers are aware of the different neurodivergencies that exist, but they just don't have the understanding of how to relate and then how to teach. They still are trying to far too often mediate the challenges rather than help the strengths. It's all about mediation. So they did a study quite a few years ago in Australia where recovery programs or remediation programs for neurodivergent kids take up about 80% of their time. And that should be flipped, where about a third of your time should be spent on remediation and your weaknesses, and 2/3 of your time needs to be spent on your strengths.
Well, and your strengths need to be seen as something to work on and not as a reward, right? So you have to work on these areas of weakness, and you only get to work on these things that aren't difficult for you if you do this.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're talking today about how to help neurodivergent kids to succeed. And I will say to you, it doesn't matter if you're neurodivergent, neurotypical, or anything. In order to succeed, you need to define yourself by your strengths. And if you go through a school system that defines you by your challenges, you will never succeed, because that is the lens you will view yourself through.
Right. So what do you recommend a parent who has a neurodiverse child to do to help get it so that their child is seen for their strengths and not their weaknesses in school?
So if you have a neurodivergent child, I would start with getting as clear a picture as possible of how your child thinks. So if you can, and I'm not sure about England, sorry, but if you can, get a psychoeducational assessment. Find out what learning profile your child has, where their strengths are, where their struggles are. That will then translate to what environments they will soar in and what environments they will struggle in. You can then go and get an assessment based from an educational therapist like myself that can then just do an interest and strength-based assessment. So they can take the psychoeducational assessment and they can do an interest-based assessment and add those together. Because as we all know, especially with neurodivergent kids, interests are the key. I mean, Ed Hallowell said, you have to be able to inject interest on demand for us. So, and that is exactly right. So we need to work out where their interests lie and then make a profile where we can actually tell way before what environments they're walking into, how they'll go in those environments, where we can put supports in, where we don't need supports, where they need to take medication, where actually taking medication isn't necessary. And really it's not short, but over years, build a profile so that this child has great self-awareness. And then we can start to build in some self-advocacy skills.
Yeah, those are all key things that we need to do. And, you know, the first step is really understanding that psych ed assessment so that you can then become the advocate, because at least here in Canada, you know, teachers don't put the same emphasis on going into detail on every psych ed that comes across their desk, because they simply don't have the time and they have a lot of demands. And so they will have a general understanding of the diversities, the common diversities like autism, ADHD, the different specific learning disabilities, but they won't necessarily know what it means to your child. And you need to take on that role of the leader of the individual education plan or the 504 or whatever your school does to support your child, and say, these are my child's strengths. These are my child's weaknesses. These are our goals that we want to reach, and this is how we're going to support them. And it's a big onus for a parent, but if you're not going to do it, who's going to do it? And because you're the one that's from day one to the last day they walk out those school doors. So you have the continuity that a lot of them won't have about your child.
Yeah, look, firstly, can I say, I'm sorry, I said England rather than Canada. I'm terrible. At least I didn't say America, okay? So sorry about that. Yes, you are completely right. So here in Australia, you go and get a psych ed report, and the parent literally gets handed over the report and a see you later, don't let the door hit you on the way out. They don't get any understanding of the report. I mean, really good psych eds may spend 15 minutes going over it, but it's not enough. The parent really doesn't understand, and they don't have teaching qualifications or psychology qualifications. They can't understand it. That report then goes to the educators and the school. Well, most schools do not have the expertise on the school grounds to truly understand it. So most schools tend to flip to the back page where it says suggestions for educational settings, and they just put in place the suggestions the psychologist has put there. But I mean, for all of us that have children, we know they ebb and flow and things change. Hormones kick in, things really change. And so the school sticks to this list that may have been written 3 years ago. But in that time, the child has grown and matured and their needs have changed. But because the school does not understand the actual profile of the child and just looking at the summary, they can't change with the student. They can't change their programs to match the changing student. So parents have to do that. And if parents can't do that, I'm sure in Canada you have these too, but in Australia, we have educational consultants like myself, and you can come to us and we will do that for you. We will do everything from explaining the assessment to you to providing a school with an IEP for you to help outline what the profile of your child is. And then we will even advocate for you at schools, because it's very hard for parents to advocate for their children when they don't quite understand either. And I said to someone the other day, I do this as a living, and yet I take an advocate to my own school meetings with my children, because even though I know as much as the person sitting next to me that I'm paying, they're not full of emotions in the meeting. I am, because it's about my child.
Well, and that's the thing. And that's exactly what I do at Garforth Education. I help them understand their psychoeducational assessment. I create the IEP binder and the intervention and support them through that process. And I'm in the process of launching the IEP terms explained, where on YouTube you can watch me define what these terms actually mean and give you examples. So if you're watching this, definitely keep your eye open for that on the Garforth Education YouTube channel, because it's not fair to have this extra onus on the parent. I mean, it's hard enough being a parent of a child with neurodiverse needs to then have to put all this extra effort just to make sure that your child's educational needs are being met.
Yeah, look, that's awesome, Kathryn. I will tune in. I will be very excited about tuning in. Yeah, and you're right. But at the end of the day, they are your children, and we would all do anything for our children. I wish, and which is why my business also provides professional development to schools, I wish that teachers and educators were better equipped to understand and teach our kids. And I see a world in not so long a way that they will be. But it hasn't been a priority as of yet in our school system. But as the numbers and the awareness of the numbers of neurodivergencies increase, I believe it will become a priority. And so I'm hoping our children's children, the schools will be better equipped to understand neurodivergencies.
Well, and that's the other thing that we should at least highlight is that traditionally, a lot of these students were in a segregated classroom and they weren't included in the classroom setting. So there are teachers that are currently teaching that didn't have any education on supporting, especially some of the kids on the autism spectrum, the Down syndrome, and the very more significantly affected students cognitively. So they don't have the experience or the training for it. And teachers are just starting to learn more about ADHD, autism, and learning disabilities. And, you know, we as a population, and that's why I'm doing this whole October Awareness Month series, because it's just really becoming part of our everyday language in the past decade. And
Yes.
the more we do it and the more awareness that happens, the more normal this conversation is going to be. And instead of, you know, a child in a class and say, oh, you're wearing headphones, you know, you're so different. Like, oh yeah, you're wearing headphones because you need them. And I think we're definitely getting to that level where there's that more acceptance, where we don't need the same explanations. But it's also very important. And again, this is stuff that I do with my own professional development series, is helping teachers understand that we do need to understand these strength and weakness profiles and realize that an intervention for one student is that intervention for them. It's not one that you can cut and paste and use for the next one. You really need to take into consideration their needs.
And their interests. It's
Yes.
their needs and their interests you need to take into account together. Like, yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, you're completely right. And I think schools will get there, and you are right. We come from a history in all these Western countries where kids with low cognitive ability were segregated, and now they are becoming more and more mainstreamed. And then my special interest, so I help all neurodivergent children, but my special interest is in twice exceptional children. And twice exceptional children just weren't diagnosed in the past. And so schools had them, but they had no idea that they had them. And even myself, my own understanding, there's a famous quote by Maya Angelou, who I love, who said, when you know better, do better. And that's one of my favorite quotes, because you don't ever need to feel guilty about a decision you made or a thought you had. If you now know better and you're flexible enough to change those decisions and those thought processes. But I'll tell you a very embarrassing thing. I went to a conference. So I was sitting in my staff room of my school that I was teaching in, which is a phenomenal school, fantastic teachers. And some of the teachers in the room were laughing about this term twice exceptionality, and they were making jokes about it. And I sort of was over listening, what's it called? Eavesdropping. Right. And then I went in and I said, that sounds like my son. And one of the teachers said, oh, geez, do you want him to have more labels? And I said, actually, no, it really sounds like my son. And this was in 2015. And that was the first time I even heard, or maybe it was 2014, of the term twice exceptionality. And then I just started delving into it. But the first night I went down to an evening on that video, on that movie, if you have seen it, called 2E, that was made from the Bridges Academy in Los Angeles. And I watched the movie, and they had a panel, and they were saying twice exceptional kids often have ADHD and are gifted. And I thought to myself, no, that's not true, because that would make me twice exceptional. And my son, I think, falls under this banner, but I don't. And you come a long way the more and more you understand. And I don't think other people are where I am yet, but that was only 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. So my understanding has come a long way.
That it can be more than 2E, right? It can be 3E, it can be 4E, especially because there's so many comorbid conditions where you have autism, dyslexia, ADHD, and giftedness in the same child. And, you know, especially when we're talking about giftedness, the solution isn't just give the child more work than everybody else has, right?
Yes, definitely. So one of the things that upsets me in gifted education is this misconception that gifted kids work independently. No, if you've got gifted kids working independently, you're not actually teaching them what they should be learning. You should be doing just as much teaching and mentoring of a gifted child as a non-gifted child. And if you're not hitting that level and you're just letting them work by themselves, you're not doing it right. And then this idea too, the other one, of gifted children think faster than other kids. Well, no, actually, that's not true either. Lots of gifted kids, their processing's actually slower because they think more deeply.
Albert
So
Einstein.
it's not about fast answers. So, but what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So I have this, and this is just me, but when it comes to all the different twice exceptional, thrice exceptional, four exceptional, I actually like to stick to just twice exceptional because I don't like the definition that it is two. So most people use a definition that it's two exceptionalities, one exceptionality of being gifted and one exceptionality of having a neurodivergence. I don't like that because it automatically makes the neurodivergence bad because you have something good and something bad. And no matter how you try and backpedal from that, you've said it already. You've defined it as that. Whereas I much prefer the definition that is twice exceptionality is people with mountains and valleys. They're very, very good at some things and they very much struggle at other things. And that's my definition. And then it doesn't matter if you have 10 comorbidities. You're just very good at some things and you're very poor at other things. In the States, thrice exceptional specifically means that you are in a racial minority. So I don't know about in Canada, but I got that right that time, in Canada. But in the States, it means you're in a racial minority. So you're twice exceptional and in a racial minority.
Yeah, in Canada, at least where I am, it's mainly just considered 2E. I often say E to the N in conditions where it's more than one because each exceptionality has a different way of affecting the individual and the interaction between them. It needs to be accounted for.
Yeah, so like on paperwork, I often write 2E in brackets autistic.
Yeah.
Or 2E in brackets ADHD. And this is something else that's interesting is I don't know if you've read any of Susan Baum's work, but have you ever read any of her work?
No.
So Susan Baum says, okay, you've got you've got blue and yellow. Mm-hmm. You can't just add those up. They actually mix together and make green. So you can't say, here are the symptoms of giftedness, here are the symptoms of autism, and then mix, like just add them up and say, here are the symptoms of a twice exceptional autistic child. You have to mix them up. And that interaction of autism and giftedness gives another whole set of symptoms and characteristics. It's like Kermit the Frog. One of my favorite songs when I was a kid was Kermit the Frog's nephew singing, sitting on the stairs, I'm neither up, I'm neither down. I'm neither in the nursery or neither in the town. And all sorts of funny things run around my head. I'm not really anywhere. I'm somewhere else instead. And as a child, I love that because I was very different. I'm still different now, but as a child, I was very different. And I just love this idea that I'm in the middle. I don't belong anywhere. I don't belong up. I don't belong down. I think in a funny way. And I'm in the middle of the stairs. It's actually a poem. They took it from A.A. Milne, Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
Sorry, there you go. That's enough of my diverting. But yeah, so she explains it as that. And I think that's really important. And then when you have comorbidities, you can't, I've often wondered if they should have a separate diagnosis for people that are ADHD and autistic, because those two together mix in a very separate way than pure autism or pure ADHD. And
you have the subtypes of ADHD. Well, are they ADHD inattentive? Are they ADHD hyperactive? Or is it combined? Right?
Yeah, look, I must say, most ADHDers, regardless of your subtype, your neurology is very similar. The way you think is very, very similar. Whether or not you can sit still or whether or not, I mean, I actually think for a student, for parents, the worst type of ADHD to have is the inattentive one, because in schools, the hyperactive one gets the teacher's attention, whereas the inattentive one does not. So your child is far more likely to be overlooked and not noticed if they have inattentive ADHD, which is well, you might get all the time, oh, your child's perfect, they're perfectly well behaved, but the flip side is the teacher doesn't know when they've gone off into space. Whereas combined, the teacher can't help but pay that child attention because the child is in their face.
Exactly. The squeaky wheel, right?
Yeah. So as a parent, I actually have three ADHDers as children. Two of them are inattentive and one of them is combined. And I can tell you now, I worry more about the inattentive ones and speak more to their teachers, because they will just go off into space and their teachers will say, well, no, they were in the class. Yeah, they were there physically, but they don't actually remember a single word you've said. And I'll tell you something else parents can do that can really help, and they can tell their teachers to do it, is a lot of these kids have incredibly good muscle memories, but incredibly bad working memories. And so a mistake that both parents and teachers make is they ask the kid to repeat the instructions. And the kid has such great muscle memory that they can repeat the instructions without actually hearing them. But they've not taken it in. So as a parent, make sure you ask your child to rephrase the instructions, never to repeat them.
Well, and that's the same thing when it comes to students typing notes in a classroom, right? It goes in the ear, through the fingers, and it doesn't stop in the brain, right?
Often, and that's why the studies have shown that writing notes by hand is more effective. Now, obviously, there's a lot of kids with dyspraxia and dysgraphia that writing notes by hand is very hard, but there is a lot of evidence to say that handwriting will help you far more than typing.
Yeah, and it's just, again, knowing the profile. So do you have any top tips that you give your clients when they're going into those meetings or having those everyday conversations with the classroom teacher or with the school when you're not there to support them?
So firstly, I say to the parents, you really need to have a big picture view of things. Do not get caught up in minute details. The teacher's the teacher, you're not. And a lot of parents get caught up in the teaching details. I say stay away from that. Make sure that the relationship is good. The relationship between you and the teacher, the relationship between your child and the teacher. Because relationships are the conduit for learning. And if that breaks down, well, it doesn't matter what the teacher puts in place, your child will not listen to it. I also say to parents, it is essential that you never speak poorly about your child's teacher in front of them, ever. If you want to complain about your child's teacher, call up a friend, but do not do it in front of your child, because that relationship is almost sacred. And especially for a neurodivergent kid, you need to build up that relationship. Never, ever break it down, no matter what you think about the teacher. Then going into a meeting, be prepared, be flexible, and be understanding and compassionate. There's a book I just love, I don't know if you've read it, by Jonathan Mooney, called Normal Sucks. Mm-hmm. It's a phenomenal book. So Jonathan Mooney is dyslexic himself, and he wrote that and please, I might not say this perfectly, so don't say this as a quote, but he wrote something like, when we understand that the problem lies in the interaction between the student and the environment, we will put all our energies into fixing the environment and not the student. And that is exactly what the parent needs to understand. and trying to convey to the teachers is that we're all in this together. We are all basically, no matter what country you come from, disenfranchised by the same educational system, parents and teachers, and then our kids stuck in the middle. So we need to be compassionate with one another and know that things don't work. So if a teacher gets things right 50% of the time for me, that's good enough. As long as I feel they have my kids back, and as long as I feel they care about my student and my child, and I love, and this is trite, but I love my students. And if I feel that their teachers care about them and love them, I'm happy with the teacher. And then we can have an honest relationship that will help my kid move forward faster. But if the teacher's scared of saying to you, I tried this and it didn't work, you will never get your kid as far ahead, because the parent and the teacher needs to feel comfortable with each other to actually say what does and doesn't work.
For sure. And, you know, knowing how to communicate. And I know I always advocate making sure that you follow up in-person conversations with an email, just to say, this is what I got from the conversation, and to give them the opportunity to reply, to make sure that on the same page, but it also documents the conversation so you can refer to it later.
Yeah, look, I am so with you there. I try and say I always do that, but that would be a lie. But in a perfect world where I wasn't an ADHDer myself, I would definitely always do it.
Yeah.
But Kathryn, I'm so sorry. I have to go soon.
Yes. Thank you so
much. I'm so sorry. But if you would like to speak again, or if any parents would like to ask questions, I can come back on just to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Again, this is Dr. Kathryn Garforth and Dr. Siobhan Lamb, and we've been discussing dealing with neurodivergent individuals in the school system. So I hope you've had a great day, and we will talk to you again later.